The moment I saw my husband kissing another woman in our home, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and somehow that silence changed everything. My name is Sophia Carter, I'm 32 years old, and until that night I believed I had a marriage people envied, the kind you post about on holidays with smiling photos and captions that say things like grateful and blessed. The kind where nothing ever seems broken from the outside, and maybe that was my first mistake, believing what things looked like instead of what they really were. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years. We lived in a quiet 2-story house just outside the city, the kind with a white fence and a driveway that still smelled faintly of fresh concrete in the summer heat. And every evening followed a pattern so predictable it felt safe. Dinner around 7, TV by 8, lights out before midnight. Nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, just a calm, steady life that I thought meant stability, meant loyalty, meant love. That night I came home earlier than usual, about 6:15 p.m., the sun still low enough to cast long shadows across the front porch, and I remember noticing how quiet everything felt the moment I stepped out of my car. No music from inside, no TV noise, just this strange stillness that pressed against my chest before I even reached the door. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe Daniel had stepped out, maybe he was in the shower, maybe it was nothing. But the second I opened the door, I knew something was different. The air felt heavier, like the house was holding its breath. I set my keys down slowly on the kitchen counter, listening, and that's when I heard it. A soft sound from upstairs, not loud, not obvious, just enough to make my heart skip once, then twice, the kind of sound you can't quite explain but can't ignore either. I remember standing there for a moment, frozen, my mind already trying to build excuses, already trying to protect me from something I wasn't ready to face. And then I started walking, one step at a time, up the stairs, my hand brushing lightly against the wall, as if I needed something to hold on to. The hallway felt longer than usual, each step echoing louder than it should have, and when I reached the bedroom door, it was slightly open, just enough for a thin line of warm light to spill into the hallway. I don't know what I expected when I pushed that door open, maybe nothing, maybe everything, but what I saw in that moment rewrote everything I thought I knew about my life. Daniel was standing there, close to another woman, his hands on her shoulders, their faces inches apart, and then they leaned in and kissed, not rushed, not accidental but familiar, like it had happened before. Time didn't stop, but it slowed just enough for every detail to burn into my memory. The way his eyes were closed, the way she smiled slightly, the way the room felt like it no longer belonged to me. And still I didn't say anything, I didn't move, I just stood there watching, feeling something inside me shift in a way I couldn't yet understand, because in that exact moment, I realized something far more terrifying than betrayal. I realized I wasn't shocked, not completely, not in the way I thought I would be, and that silence, that calm, was the beginning of everything that came next. I do not remember deciding to step into the room, but suddenly I was there, standing just a few feet away from them, close enough to hear the quiet sound of their breathing as they pulled apart, close enough to see the exact moment Daniel realized I was not supposed to be there. His eyes opened first, confusion flickering for a split second before it turned into something else, something sharper, something closer to fear, and that was when he stepped back quickly, like distance could somehow undo what I had already seen. The woman turned next, her expression shifting from calm to startled, her hand dropping from his arm as if she had just touched something she should not have. And for a brief moment, the three of us simply stood there, locked in a silence that felt heavier than any argument could have been. I remember noticing small things that did not matter and yet felt impossible to ignore. The faint scent of a perfume that was not mine, the way the bedside lamp cast a soft glow across the room, the familiar shape of our bed now feeling like something foreign, like it belonged to someone else's life instead of mine. Daniel said my name then, slowly, carefully, like he was testing how it sounded in the air. Sophia. And I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the way he was already searching for the right words, the right explanation, something that could make this moment less real than it was. But I did not answer him, not right away, because I was still trying to understand the feeling inside my chest, the strange calm that had settled there instead of the anger I expected, instead of the heartbreak everyone talks about, and that calm made everything feel sharper, clearer, almost unreal. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if he was not sure he was allowed to come any closer, and I watched him carefully, noticing details I had ignored for months, the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking directly at me for more than a second, the subtle shift in his posture that told me this was not new to him, that this was not a mistake, but something practiced, something repeated. The woman glanced between us, uncertain, her confidence from moments ago gone, replaced by a quiet discomfort. And I realized then that she did not know what role she was supposed to play in this scene anymore. "It is not what it looks like," Daniel said finally, his voice low, almost cautious, and the moment those words left his mouth, something inside me settled even further, because I had heard that sentence before, not here, not like this, but in small ways, in delayed explanations, in half-answers, in moments when things did not quite add up and I chose not to question them. I tilted my head slightly, studying him, and for the first time in years I was not trying to understand him, not trying to fix anything, not trying to protect what we had. I was simply observing, like I was seeing him as he really was instead of who I believed him to be. The room felt smaller with each passing second, the silence stretching, tightening, and I could tell he was waiting for me to react, to raise my voice, to cry, to give him something he could respond to, something familiar, but I gave him nothing, and that seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. I took a slow breath, steady, controlled, and finally spoke, my voice quieter than I expected but firm in a way I had never heard before. "How long?" And the question hung in the air between us, simple, direct, impossible to avoid, and in that moment I knew the answer would change everything, not just about him, but about everything I thought my life had been. Daniel did not answer right away, and that silence told me more than any words could have. The way his eyes shifted slightly to the side, the way his shoulders tensed, the way he inhaled slowly like he was buying himself time. All of it felt familiar in a way that made my chest tighten just a little, not with pain but with recognition. I watched him carefully, waiting, not because I needed an answer anymore, but because I wanted to see how he would try to build one, how he would try to reshape the truth into something easier to accept. "It just happened," he finally said, his voice low, controlled, like he was choosing each word with precision, and I almost smiled at how predictable that sounded, how simple he tried to make something that clearly was not simple at all. I tilted my head slightly again, still calm, still steady, and repeated the question, this time slower. "How long, Daniel?" And that was when the air in the room shifted again, heavier, more real, like there was no space left for excuses anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling, and for a brief second, I saw something honest in his expression, not regret, not guilt, but resignation, like he understood that whatever version of the truth he gave me now would not change the outcome. "A few months," he said quietly, and those 3 words landed differently than I expected, not like a shock, not like a sudden collapse, but like something I had already known, something that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind for longer than I wanted to admit. "Few months." I repeated it silently, letting it settle, letting it connect to every small moment I had ignored. Every late night he came home with an explanation that did not quite make sense, every time he kept his phone just a little too close, every time he seemed distracted when I spoke, like his attention belonged somewhere else. The woman shifted slightly beside him, uncomfortable now, her earlier confidence completely gone, and I noticed the way she avoided looking at me directly, the way she held her hands together as if she did not know where to put them, and it struck me then that she was not the center of this story. Not really, she was just a piece of it, just a result of something that had already been broken long before tonight. "Her name is Rachel," Daniel added, almost as if offering more information would somehow soften the situation, and I nodded once, slowly, acknowledging it without reacting, without giving him the response he was searching for. Rachel. A name I had never heard before, and yet somehow it felt like it had been part of my life for longer than I realized. I took a small step back, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because I needed space to see everything clearly, and for the first time since I walked into that room, I allowed myself to look at the bigger picture, not just this moment, not just them, but us, the years behind us, the patterns, the quiet distance that had been growing without me fully confronting it. "Did you think I would never find out?" I asked, my voice still controlled, and he opened his mouth as if to answer, then closed it again because there was no good answer to that question. No version that would make him look better, no explanation that would erase what had already happened. The silence returned, thicker now, more final, and I realized something in that moment that changed everything. I was not standing there trying to save my marriage, I was standing there realizing it had already ended long before I walked through that door. And somehow that realization felt more powerful than anything else, because it meant I was no longer reacting, I was understanding, and once you understand something like that, there is no going back. For a moment, no one moved, and that stillness felt louder than any argument we could have had, like the room itself was waiting for something to break, but nothing did, not in the way people expect, not with raised voices or tears, just a quiet shift that felt far more permanent. I looked at Daniel again, really looked at him, not as my husband, not as the man I built a life with, but as someone standing across from me with choices he had already made. And I realized how different he seemed when I stopped trying to see him through the version of him I had held onto for years. "You could have told me," I said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating something simple, something obvious, and he nodded quickly, almost eagerly, like he could finally agree with something, like agreement might pull him out of this moment. "I know," he said, stepping forward again, his voice softer now, almost careful. I just did not know how." And I watched him as he spoke, noticing how his words came out in pieces, how they felt rehearsed but incomplete at the same time, like he had thought about this conversation before, just not like this, not with me standing here so calm, so unmoved. Rachel shifted again behind him, and I could feel her presence without looking, the quiet tension she carried, the uncertainty, and for a brief second I wondered what he had told her about me, what version of our life he had shared. Whether I was the distant wife, the cold partner, the reason he needed something else, but that thought passed quickly because it no longer mattered. "You were going to tell me," I repeated, not as a question, but as something I was testing out loud, and the words felt empty the moment they left my mouth, because we both knew the truth was different. The truth was that he had not planned to tell me, not really, not until he had no other choice. I walked further into the room then, slowly, my eyes moving across familiar objects that suddenly felt out of place. The dresser we picked together, the framed photo from our trip to California, the small details of a shared life that now felt like evidence of something that had quietly faded without me fully noticing. "I kept thinking something was off," I said, more to myself than to him, my voice steady, almost reflective, but I told myself I was imagining it. And as I spoke, memories surfaced, small moments I had pushed aside, nights he turned away from me without explanation, conversations that ended too quickly, the way he stopped asking about my day, the way everything became just a little more distant over time. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but I raised my hand slightly, not to stop him out of anger, but because I did not need his explanation anymore, not the full version, not the details, because I already understood enough. "It is strange," I continued, my eyes finally meeting his again, "how you can feel something changing long before you are ready to admit it." And there was a quiet truth in that statement that hung between us, something undeniable, something that did not need to be argued or explained. He looked at me then with something new in his expression, something closer to confusion than fear, like he could not understand why I was not reacting the way he expected, why I was not breaking, why I was not trying to hold on to him, and that confusion only made everything clearer to me. Because in that moment, I realized that what we had was not something that could be fixed with apologies or explanations. It was something that had already unraveled piece by piece, quietly, over time, until there was nothing left to hold together. I took another slow breath, steady, controlled, and for the first time since I walked into that room, I felt something close to certainty, not about him, not about what he had done, but about myself, about the fact that I was no longer standing here as someone trying to understand his choices. I was standing here as someone beginning to understand my own. I walked toward the window slowly, my reflection faint in the glass, layered over the quiet street outside, and for a moment it felt like I was looking at two versions of myself at once, the woman who had walked into this house believing she still had a marriage, and the one standing here now, seeing everything with a clarity that felt almost unsettling. Behind me I could hear Daniel shifting his weight, hear the uncertainty in his breathing, the way he seemed to be waiting for something, for me to turn back, to say something emotional, something he could respond to, something that would pull this moment into a familiar pattern. But I stayed where I was, letting the silence stretch just a little longer. "Sophia, please," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost careful, like he was trying to find the right tone. "We can talk about this." And I closed my eyes for a brief second, not because I needed to think, but because I wanted to feel the difference between what he was saying and what was actually real. "We can talk about this." The words sounded reasonable, calm, almost hopeful, but they came too late, far too late to mean anything. I turned back slowly, meeting his eyes again, and for the first time I saw something I had not noticed before, not guilt, not regret, but fear, not of losing me, but of losing control of the situation, of not knowing what I would do next. "There is nothing to talk about," I said quietly, and the moment those words left my mouth, I felt something inside me settle completely, like a decision had already been made long before I said it out loud. Rachel shifted again, stepping slightly farther away from him, creating a small distance between them that had not been there before, and I noticed how quickly she adjusted her posture, how she seemed to be pulling herself out of the situation, as if she suddenly understood that this was no longer something she wanted to stand in the middle of. Daniel looked at her for a split second, then back at me, and that brief glance told me everything I needed to know about how fragile whatever they had really was. It was a mistake, he added quickly, the words coming out faster now, more urgent. It did not mean anything. And I almost laughed, not out of amusement, but because of how familiar that sentence sounded, how predictable it was, how it tried to shrink months of choices into a single moment that could be dismissed. A few months is not a mistake, I replied calmly, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on his, and he froze for just a second, like he had not expected that response, like he had hoped I would accept something simpler, something easier. The room felt different now, not tense, not chaotic, but resolved in a way that made everything clearer. And I realized that this was the moment where everything shifted completely, not because of what he did, but because of how I was choosing to respond to it. You made a decision, I continued, taking a small step toward him, not aggressively, not emotionally, just enough to close the distance slightly, and you kept making it over and over again. And he looked down briefly, unable to hold my gaze, and that small reaction said more than anything else he could have said. I took a breath, slow and controlled, and felt that same calm settle deeper, stronger, like it was no longer just a reaction but a foundation. And now I am making mine, I said, and for the first time since I walked into that room, I saw something shift in his expression that looked like realization, like he was finally beginning to understand that this was not a conversation he could steer, not a situation he could fix with words, because this was no longer about him, it was about me, and what I was no longer willing to accept. Daniel stared at me as if he was trying to find a version of me he still recognized, something familiar, something predictable, but whatever he was searching for was no longer there. And I could see it in the way his expression shifted, the way his confidence began to unravel piece by piece. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice tighter now, less controlled, and for the first time, there was a trace of urgency in it, not the calm explanations from before, not the careful words, but something closer to panic. I did not answer immediately, not because I needed time, but because I wanted him to sit in that uncertainty for a moment, the same uncertainty I had lived with for months without fully understanding it. I walked past him slowly, moving toward the dresser, my fingers brushing lightly across its surface as if grounding myself in something real, something stable, and I noticed how he turned to follow me, his movements quick, restless, like he was trying to stay close enough to control the conversation. "Sophia, do not do this," he said, his tone sharper now, more direct, and I paused for a second, letting those words settle, because it was interesting how quickly his focus shifted, not to what he had done, but to what I might do next. "Do not do this." As if I was the one about to break something. I turned back to face him again, my expression calm, my voice even. "I am not doing anything," I said quietly, and that was the truth, because this moment was not about action, it was about clarity, about finally seeing something without trying to fix it. "This is already done." The words felt solid, undeniable, and I watched as they landed on him, watched as he tried to process them, tried to reshape them into something less final. "No, it is not," he replied quickly, stepping closer again, his hands slightly raised like he was trying to reach for something he could not quite grasp. "We can fix this, we can work through it." And there it was, the shift from denial to negotiation, the attempt to pull everything back into a space where he still had influence, still had control. I held his gaze steady, unshaken, and for a brief moment, I almost felt something like sympathy, not for what he had done, but for how little he understood what was actually happening. "You cannot fix something you already chose to break," I said, my voice soft but firm, and that sentence seemed to hit him harder than anything else, because he froze just for a second, like the truth in it was too direct to avoid. Behind him, Rachel had moved even farther away now, standing near the doorway, her presence quieter, almost fading, and I realized she was no longer part of this moment at all, not really, because this was never just about her, it was about us. About what had already fallen apart long before she ever entered the picture. "It did not mean anything," Daniel repeated again. But this time the words sounded weaker, less convincing, like he was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. I shook my head slightly, not in anger, not in frustration, but in quiet certainty. "It meant enough for you to choose it," I replied, and that was the difference, that was the part he could not undo, the repeated decision, the quiet commitment to something outside of what we had built together. The room felt still again, but this time it was different. Not heavy, not tense, just settled, like everything had finally reached its natural conclusion. I took a slow breath, feeling that calm deepen even further, And in that moment I understood something clearly, something I had not fully realized before. I was not losing anything here, not really, because what I thought I had was already gone, and all that remained was the choice of what I would do next, and that choice, for the first time in a long time, felt entirely mine. I held his gaze for a few seconds longer, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to fully understand what was about to happen, not as a reaction, not as a moment of anger, but as a decision that had already settled inside me long before I spoke it out loud. "I am going to file for divorce," I said finally, my voice calm, steady, almost quiet, and yet the weight of those words filled the entire room in a way nothing else had. Daniel did not respond immediately, and for a brief second it looked like he had not heard me at all, like his mind was refusing to process what I had just said. But then his expression changed, slowly at first, then all at once, disbelief turning into something sharper, something more desperate. "You are serious?" he asked, his voice rising slightly, and I nodded once, a simple movement, but it felt more final than anything else I could have done. "You are just going to throw everything away?" he continued, stepping closer, his tone no longer careful, no longer controlled, and I could hear the frustration building, the shift from fear into anger, because he was losing the ability to shape this moment. I did not step back, I did not raise my voice, I simply stood there, grounded, certain. "I am not throwing anything away," I replied quietly. "I am letting go of something that is already gone." And that difference seemed to hit him harder than the word divorce itself, because he paused, his mouth opening slightly as if he was about to argue, then closing again when he realized there was nothing left to argue against. "We have 6 years together," he said after a moment, his voice lower now, almost searching, like he was trying to reach something inside me that no longer responded the way it used to. "You cannot just walk away from that." And I felt a brief flicker of something when he said that, not doubt, not hesitation, but recognition of what those years had meant, the memories, the routines, the life we built piece by piece. But that feeling passed quickly, replaced by something stronger, something clearer. "I am not walking away from the past," I said, meeting his eyes again. "I am choosing my future." And there was a quiet truth in that sentence that settled between us, something that could not be undone or rephrased. Behind him, Rachel remained near the doorway, completely still now, as if she understood that this moment no longer belonged to her at all, that whatever role she had played ended the second I made that decision, and for the first time I did not see her as a threat or even as part of the problem. She was simply a consequence of something that had already been broken. Daniel ran his hand through his hair again, pacing slightly now, the controlled version of him gone, replaced by someone trying to catch up to a reality he had not expected. "We can go to counseling," he said quickly, turning back to me, his words coming faster now, more urgent. "We can fix this, people go through worse and come back from it." And I listened, not interrupting, not reacting, letting him say everything he needed to say, because I knew none of it would change what had already been decided. When he finished, the room fell quiet again, and I took a slow breath before speaking, my voice steady, unwavering. "You are trying to fix something because you got caught?" I said, not harsh, not accusatory, just honest, and that honesty seemed to land deeper than anything else, because he stopped moving, completely still now, his eyes fixed on me as if he was finally beginning to understand the difference between regret and consequence. I held that moment for a second, then added quietly, "But I am not here to fix it." And in that instant everything shifted completely, not just in the room but inside me, because for the first time I was not reacting to what he had done. I was defining what I would no longer accept, and that clarity felt stronger than anything I had felt since I walked through that door. I did not wait for him to say anything else, because there was nothing left that could change what I had already decided, and for the first time since I walked into that room, I turned away from him completely, not out of anger, not out of pain, but out of certainty. I moved toward the closet slowly, each step steady, deliberate, and I could feel his eyes on me, confused, searching, trying to understand what I was doing now that words had failed him. I opened the closet door and reached for a small suitcase on the top shelf, the one we used for short trips, and as I pulled it down I heard him exhale sharply behind me. "Sophia, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tighter now, more strained, and I placed the suitcase on the bed without rushing, without hesitation. "I am leaving," I said simply, and those words felt lighter than I expected. Not heavy, not painful, just clear. He stepped closer again. Faster this time, like he was trying to catch up to something already moving beyond him. "You do not have to do this tonight," he said quickly. "We can talk, we can figure things out in the morning." And I paused for just a second, not because I was considering it, but because I recognized the pattern, the delay, the attempt to push everything into later, into a space where things might feel less real, less final. There is nothing to figure out, I replied calmly, opening the suitcase and beginning to fold a few clothes, simple, necessary things, not everything, just enough. Each movement felt grounded, intentional, like I was reclaiming control in the most basic way. Behind me, I could hear him pacing again, the sound of his footsteps uneven now, no longer controlled, no longer measured. "You are overreacting," he said suddenly, the frustration breaking through, and I stopped for a moment, one hand resting on the edge of the suitcase, letting those words settle in the air. Overreacting. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at him, and there was something almost distant in the way I looked at him now, like I was seeing him from the outside for the first time. "No," I said quietly. "This is the most rational decision I have made in a long time," and that seemed to unsettle him even more than anger would have, because he did not know how to respond to calm, to clarity, to a version of me that was no longer trying to meet him halfway. Rachel shifted again near the doorway, her presence now almost invisible, and I could sense that she was waiting, unsure whether to leave or stay, caught in a situation that no longer included her in any meaningful way. I zipped the suitcase halfway, then paused, looking around the room one more time, not with sadness, not with regret, but with a quiet acknowledgement of what this space had been, and what it no longer was. Daniel stepped closer again, stopping just a few feet away, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Sophia, please," he said, and for a brief moment, I could hear something real in it. Not control, not strategy, just fear of losing something he had taken for granted. I closed the suitcase fully and lifted it from the bed, the weight familiar, manageable, and I turned to face him one last time. "You already lost it," I said, my voice steady, not cruel, not emotional, just honest, and that honesty seemed to take the last bit of resistance out of him, because he did not argue this time, he did not step forward, he just stood there, watching as the reality of the moment settled in. I walked past him then, toward the door, my steps quiet but certain, and as I reached the hallway I felt something shift inside me again, not like something breaking, but like something opening, like a space I had not realized was there until now, and for the first time the silence did not feel heavy, it felt like freedom. I stepped outside into the evening air, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything felt. Not the heavy silence from inside the house, but a different kind of quiet, something open, something that did not press against my chest but instead gave me space to breathe. The sky was still light, soft shades of orange and blue stretching across the horizon, and for a moment, I just stood there on the front porch, holding my suitcase, letting that stillness settle around me. Behind me, I could hear the faint echo of movement inside the house, a door shifting, footsteps that no longer belonged to me, and I realized how quickly a place could stop feeling like home once the truth finally revealed itself. I walked down the driveway slowly, each step steady, the sound of my shoes against the pavement grounding me in a way I had not felt in a long time, and as I reached my car I paused again, my hand resting lightly on the handle, not out of hesitation but out of awareness, because I understood that this moment was not just about leaving a house, it was about stepping into something entirely new. I placed the suitcase in the back seat and sat behind the wheel, my hands resting on the steering wheel for a second longer than necessary, feeling the quiet hum of the engine as I started the car, and for the first time the silence did not feel empty, it felt full, like it was holding space for something that had not yet been defined. I pulled away slowly, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror, and I did not look back again, not because I was trying to forget, but because I did not need to hold on to something that no longer belonged to me. The road ahead stretched out under the fading light, familiar streets that suddenly felt different, not because they had changed, but because I had. As I drove, I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years, the choices, the quiet compromises I had made without realizing how much they were costing me, and for the first time I did not feel regret, I felt clarity. I was not leaving because I was broken, I was leaving because I finally understood my own worth, and that understanding felt stronger than anything I had lost. I reached a stoplight and waited as the red light glowed in front of me, the city moving quietly around me, and I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, really looked at myself, not as someone's wife, not as part of a shared identity, but as an individual standing at the beginning of something new. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas gently, moving forward without hesitation, without doubt. I did not know exactly what came next, where I would go, how everything would unfold, But for the first time, that uncertainty did not